Hi and welcome to the Psykhe podcast, where we discuss all things mindset, mental well-being and living your best life. I'm your host Hannah and I'm a mindset and mental well-being coach and founder of Psykhe Coaching. Welcome and we hope you enjoy the show. Hi everyone and welcome back to the Psykhe podcast. We're here with a bonus episode for World Bipolar Day. So this is the day that happens every March 30th, and it's all about raising awareness of bipolar disorders and eliminating the social stigma that often surrounds the condition. And it's about educating and improving sensitivity towards the illness. If you're wanting to find out more about bipolar, rethink mental illness, have some information about World Bipolar Day on their website, and you can find out more about the symptoms and the impact they can have and share stories. They have a very helpful bipolar disorder fact sheet that you can download. It has an overview about the different types and the symptoms of both depression, mania, psychosis that can also be associated. And in this episode, we're joined by Sheree, who has bipolar 1. And so she talks about her experiences with it, from the long journey it took to getting diagnosis, the impact of that diagnosis, then the journey towards finding the correct medication that would help her to live a normal life in the way that we would class a normal life, I guess. So I hope you really enjoy this conversation. Sheree gets very personal about her experiences and she's really passionate about ending the stigma. So I really wanted to get this episode out today as a bonus one because it just fits perfectly with the Awareness Day, and hopefully this will go some way to raising awareness and ending the stigma. So if you're in the UK and you think that you might have bipolar disorder, if what Sheree's saying is really resonating with you, then the first step is to speak to your GP, which at the moment might be a bit tricky. So it could be a telephone consultation. But it's really helpful to have a record of moods, because one of the things with bipolar is that swing of moods between mania and depression. So having a mood diary, keeping a mood scale, and Bipolar UK have both of those resources on their website that you can use, and that will help the GP to see the pattern of your moods. But your GP can't actually diagnose it. It would be a referral on to a psychiatrist as part of the community mental health team. So that's the kind of process which we're not going to get into too much. But again, there's lots of information online. Rethink mental illness. Like I said, Bipolar UK. So obviously Sheree is joining us from the US, but for any of our UK listeners, Bipolar UK is a charity that is focused on empowering everyone affected by bipolar to live well and fulfill their potential. And they have some specific advice around coronavirus at the moment for people that are also bipolar. They have stories, they have information about how they help people, what they do. Also, if you are bipolar and you want to share your story, then there is a section on the website where you can share your story with them, information about getting help, or if you were really touched by this and you want to help and you want to volunteer, then there's information for that as well. As it is World Bipolar Day, we would love it if you would share your thoughts on this episode, help us also raise awareness and fight the stigma around bipolar disorder. So the hashtags that are being used are hashtag World Bipolar Day and hashtag bipolar strong. And then also you can tag on Twitter at INTL Bipolar and International Bipolar Foundation on Facebook, and we'll put the links to those in the show notes. It would be great if you were also joined in sharing awareness, sharing this episode so that it reaches more people, and sharing your own story if you feel pulled to do so. We'll also include links in the show notes, as we usually do, to our guest Sheree and to her blog, so that you can follow and you can read more about her experiences with bipolar and get some more information, insight from there. So I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed chatting to Sheree and delving a bit more into another mental illness condition that isn't spoken about as much, and that I think there is still a lot of misconceptions around and stigma around. And one of the big things on this podcast is about us breaking down some of that stigma, about giving people an opportunity to share their stories, because there can be something really powerful in coming to terms with our story and understanding our own mental world and what's going on. And I think that's something that does come up in this episode about the impact of that and understanding what's going on in your own head. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you join us after the interview, and I'm going to read a little extract from the book An Unquiet Mind that Sheree refers to, which is a fantastic book, which I absolutely would recommend if you are wanting to find out more about bipolar and hear more personal stories. And there's also, if you are more a visual person rather than reading, then there are quite a few TED Talks around bipolar and removing the stigma, destigmatizing bipolar, understanding bipolar. So I just popped in TED bipolar in YouTube, and already I've got quite a few episodes coming up. Some with living with bipolar type 2. Sheree has bipolar type 1, and she talks a little bit about the differences. But at the end of this interview, I'll go over those briefly as well. There's a story, Rodrigo Rangel talking about having a manic episode, quitting his job, creativity and bipolar. Basically, people seeing it as a gift. So pop bipolar and TED into YouTube and you come up with a whole page of talks about it. So there is a wealth of information around to find out more, and hopefully this episode will also be useful and informational. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you again to Sheree for joining me, and I will check back in with you afterwards just to share a bit more information and another little bit of a story about bipolar. Hi everyone, and I'm really excited to welcome this week's guest, Sheree, to the podcast. So Sheree, if you could introduce yourself to the listeners.
Well, Hannah, it's good to be with you this morning. And my name again is Sheree Martines. I am a writer. I suffer from bipolar 1. Actually, I was a rapid cycling bipolar. But for more than 25 years, I had a very successful career in nonprofit public relations. And unfortunately, bipolar actually cost me that career, as well as many other things in my life. But today I'm a very happy person. I love to camp, whitewater raft, and because of the journey I've been through, I'm able to do those things again today. So I'm really glad to be here, and I hope I can maybe help someone with the experiences I've had.
Amazing. And bipolar is something that we've not really talked about on the podcast in detail before, and obviously I'm really keen to share a wide variety of mental health experiences so that people are listening to this that have bipolar or know someone who is bipolar or just are interested in finding out more about different experiences, that hopefully they can get something from the podcast. And so you said that you have bipolar 1. Could you talk a little bit about the different types of bipolar?
Yes. Bipolar 1 is a very serious manifestation of the disorder. It's actually, a lot of people don't realize, it's a genetically transmitted abnormality that causes, problems with the brain's chemistry and how you regulate emotions. It's manifested by severe depression, and then at one end of the spectrum, and incredible euphoria, which can escalate into a very dangerous state. These are bipolar 2 do not experience these symptoms with the severity that a bipolar 1 was. I also happen to be a rapid cycling bipolar, which means that they say if you have 4 phases during a year, you're rapid cycling. But in my case, I was so severe that I would be at the very depth of a very dark depression, and slowly, as I would come out, it'd be about 2 weeks, I slowly come out of it. I might have, 1 or 2 days of levelness, and then I would begin to escalate. Now, mania, one of the problems with it is so euphoric as you begin to go through, the escalation. But as it begins to manifest itself, you're unable, your thoughts are going so fast, you cannot control them. you're just, going 90 miles an hour. You think you can do anything. You have grandiose thoughts. And at the very end of it, you can become very self-destructive. So bipolar 1 tends to be much more serious than bipolar 2. However, any mental illness is a difficult thing. 1 in 3 individuals have some type of mental disorder. So, if you're sitting around a table, look around. And one of the things that bothers me the most, Hannah, is there's still so much stigma related to mental illness. And one of the things with bipolar is it's very, very difficult to diagnose. People will go, well, I went 50 years before I was diagnosed correctly. I've been misdiagnosed for a large part of my life as clinically depressed. I was hospitalized for that time and time again. But, the fact that it does go misdiagnosed, I think impacts the rates of suicide. The sad thing is that 1 in 5 individuals with bipolar does succeed in ending their life. And that's a really sad statistic. But there is help. And actually, statistics show that it tends to manifest itself in the early 20s usually, but it can begin in early childhood. It can be impacted by childhood trauma, which I unfortunately suffered. But I don't remember anything about it until I was 13. When I was 13, I guess the age of puberty, I began to have severe depression. I really didn't know what it was. I was a preteen or a teenager, and I just know I started going through these very, very low bouts where I was almost incapacitated, but it wasn't all the time. And so this went on until when I was 15. The depression grew so great that I began to hurt myself, and I first began with cutting, and then it escalated to suicidal ideation, and actually attempted suicide on quite a few occasions. When I was 20, after 3 attempts very close together, I was taken to the same emergency room, and the same doctor treated me, and he told me, he said, if I see you in here one more time, I'm going to have you committed. And he did. But I was still misdiagnosed. That's the issue. Here I was it was actually a mental ward back then, very stigmatic. But my psychiatrist just said I was clinically depressed. So I was there for over 2 months, receiving treatment. But I left there not knowing that I still had a monster within me.
Thank you for sharing that. And it is like you said, very shocking, isn't it, the statistics, because it's such a high proportion. But I think when you're speaking there about your experience of what sounds like a really challenging time for you, and I suppose not really knowing the reason why.
Exactly.
I wonder whether you felt, when you're being told you're depressed, did you feel that didn't really completely match what you were experiencing? Or at the time, did you kind of think, okay, that's it?
Yeah, at the time, that's what I thought, Hannah. I thought that, this is depression. And, at the time, you focus on, because you feel so unbearably miserable. It's such a black hole when you fall into the depths of it, which I know many people out there know, that you may not really realize that you're having the highs on the other side of it. And as I said, it exacerbates as you age. And mine really got into full bloom in my late 40s. But yes, I just thought that's what I thought. I kept thinking it was depression, and I was also diagnosed with panic disorder and much anxiety, in depression, much isolation. I would cut myself off from the world. But after I got out of the hospital, I must have been in a manic mood because I realized I had to change my life. I had to do something with my life. So, I say I sort of rose like the phoenix. I went back to school. I graduated with honors. I started a career with a Fortune 500 company, making very good money. And for, like I said, close to 30 years, I had a very successful career, but I was still having bouts of the depression. Was the only thing I really noticed was the depression. And I was very good at concealing it from others, especially as I got into nonprofit management. It was challenging, but I was able to disguise it and still perform very successfully. It wasn't until in my 40s, things began to change. I was highly productive, a multitasker, but all of a sudden I'd be sitting at my desk and I would be looking at everything and I'd be so overwhelmed and my mind would be racing so fast that I didn't get anything done and I just want to scream. And it continued to get worse to the point I could not perform my job. It was terrible. And same time I began to drink heavily to numb myself. And so I began to think, well, I'm an alcoholic. That's what it is. So I quit drinking and, went to AA meetings. And I was referred to one doctor. And I had been in his office about 10 minutes. He'd been talking with me. And he said, have you ever been tested for bipolar? And I said, no. I said, my diagnosis has always been clinical depression. Well, there's not a blood test for finding out that bipolar. And, it's part of the problem. People go so long without really knowing what they have, just knowing that they're going through a lot of bad things. But it's a behavioral thing. And we went through it, and he says, you're definitely bipolar. And, also, there's a lot to diagnosing it. I mean, your history is real critical, but then an inventory of some of your behaviors really helps make the diagnosis.
And I wonder, when you saw him, were you more in a depressive episode or manic?
I was manic. I was very manic because I was talking very fast. My leg was bouncing up and down. I was, bouncing around with different thoughts, digressing, and so yes, I was very manic.
Because I just ask because I remember talking to my GP at a time when I was trying to figure out my own mental health and what was going on, and we had a discussion about bipolar and never bipolar 1, but and what he'd said was that they would have to see someone in a manic episode to really be able to say
exactly
that that's what it is, as opposed to something else. So that was just why I was wondering. So how old were you when you had this diagnosis, and how long ago, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, it's been 15 years. I was 50, but it had really begun to impact my life in probably my mid-40s. That's when I began to notice something wasn't right. I wasn't as quick as I was. I was having more of the episodes of, again, I was still focused on the depression. But fortunately, I was finally diagnosed, and but unfortunately, bipolar can be very difficult to treat, to find the right combination of meds and things like that. So it took another 6 years before I was finally hit. My doctors finally hit upon the right combination of medications to allow me to begin to really live again. I mean, to live a life and be productive and be on a positive level. So I'm very grateful for that, and it saved my life.
I'm so glad that you've got to this point where you are on that level. Yeah, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
And I think thank you for sharing about the time it took to find the right medication combination, because I think sometimes people don't appreciate that even if you have figured out with your doctor what is going on, it's not as simple as just take this and it will be all sorted. We're all individual chemistry. So thank you for sharing that. But getting the actual diagnosis and someone saying, this is what it is, how did that feel for you to finally have someone, be able to really tell you what was going on?
Oh, Hannah, it was such a relief. I mean, not knowing knowing something was wrong, but not knowing what it was, watching my life crumble. And just devastation. So when I heard the diagnosis, no matter how bad it was, at least, it's like anything, Hannah. Once you know what you're dealing with, then you can begin to take the action that you need to get back to where you need to be. So yeah, I was happy. But I mean, that for the moment, but then I still continued to go through the cycles, and there was a lot of frustration, and still, it went on so long. I told my doctor, after there'd been 3 or 4 years, I said, this is not living. This is not living. Again, I was a rapid cycler. I had very few periods of levelness, you have your feet on the ground. And, I became very suicidal again. And I will say, my last attempt, I almost died. They did have to resuscitate me. And I learned that night that I wanted to live, and I never have gone that path again. And my healing, they found the right combination of meds, and there's a lot more to it than just the meds. Those of us with bipolar, we have a responsibility to educate ourselves, to know as much as we can, to recognize triggers, things that might set us off. Are we not sleeping? Are we talking too much? Are we showing any risky behavior? Or have we totally withdrawn from the world and isolated ourselves? So, we have a responsibility. Take your meds, recognize the symptoms, reach out. But it is very possible to, have a good life, and to just by following some guidelines or some of your personal goals and things, you can have a good life. You can have a good life.
Thank you for sharing that, because I would imagine that going through that and then even finding out what it is, but then still having that long journey to get to that point must have been so challenging. But to now be at this point where you can share with people who are maybe going through that there is hope, and that you can get to a point where, like you said, you have a life. Just thank you so much for sharing the message.
Absolutely. I doubt I would have been able to write the book I just completed, which is a true crime chronicle called Rude Awakening, just a quick little blurb there. But I doubt I would have been able to complete that had I not finally reached solid ground again.
Mm-hmm.
There's an aspect I'll just mention briefly. There is, for several years, I tried to keep it in the closet. I didn't want people to know, because the people who found out, they did step back and slip away. I mean, I lost many friends during those early phases of it. And, the stigma and discrimination, causes many good people to go without help, discrimination, stigma, isolation, they're denied their ability to fully participate in society. And right now, I'm a vocal advocate working against that as much as I can.
And have you seen a change from the time that you received your diagnosis to now in that level of stigma and discrimination?
Unfortunately, despite the many efforts to educate the public, stigma still exists. And one place that bothers me is in the media. I mean, so many shows, it's really ridiculous. Like one show said something like, well, that Hershey's on that mental medication. Or, oh my God, she was bipolar and she killed her husband. I heard something funny after I heard that last thing. It said, what if somebody said, oh my God, she's diabetic and she killed her husband. I mean, and bipolar is like any of the, lifelong illnesses, the diabetes, epilepsy, bipolar. I mean, they you don't ever totally recover, but you learn to manage it throughout your life so that you can have a full and very rewarding life. And that's what I'm living right now.
Yeah, I think a lot is, misconceptions about mental illnesses.
Very much so.
But I think also a lot is fear of the unknown. And I think there's also a lot about, if something is wrong with a physical part of the body, it almost is okay, or more okay in society, to say, oh yeah, I've got an issue with this part of my body. But if it's the brain that has an issue, it's like we almost hold people responsible in some way.
Exactly.
But it's just a part of the body in the same way as like your heart or your liver or whatever. And yes, you can, look after it, and like you said, with the awareness and that kind of thing, but it's still something that's not under conscious control that can go wrong.
No, I cannot help it, or I cannot help it that I'm a rapid cycling bipolar 1. But I can help how I manage that. One thing that I noticed, a lot of people would say, it's like, just snap out of it, And you don't snap out of bipolar depression or bipolar mania. And you say you have bipolar as well?
Well, I don't know what I have. I definitely, so I definitely have
dealing with some challenges.
Yeah, I definitely have periods of depression.
Yeah.
But I suppose luckily, I'm kind of a more high functioning depressive person.
Yeah.
I have periods.
I used to be.
Yeah, luckily. I have periods of anxiety, and social anxiety and that kind of thing. And the reason I spoke to the doctor about bipolar is I sort of noticed a little bit that when I wasn't depressed and I kind of thought I was okay, actually some of the behaviors maybe were a little bit too like risk taking or too much to the extreme. But so I don't know really, but I'm just trying to just, like you said, be aware of my own stuff and try and
Very much so. I understand that. Good luck with that. You'll get there.
Thanks. I think actually, I mean, having conversations like this is really helpful, because I think when you hear someone else's story, and I don't know, I think there's just something about it that it is reassuring, even if it is slightly different to to your own story. It's
Absolutely.
even though, who knows, I may or may not have, definitely not bipolar 1, but the strategies that you use and that checking in whatever mental illness you have is applicable, isn't it, to be aware of yourself and look after yourself. So you finished your true crime book, and you're writing another book as well. So could you tell us a bit about this?
Yes, I am. Actually, well, it took me 6 years to write the true crime, but this one is going very quickly. Partly because I have maintained a blog since 2007, and although during the book writing of the other one, I sort of neglected it. But yes, I am writing a memoir about my experiences with the disorder, how it almost cost me my life, and how I was able to finally land on solid ground again and have a productive life, a happy life. And occasionally I will know I'm starting to go into mania, and I'm responsible for doing what I need to do. I need to take my meds. I need to get sleep. I need to call my doctor if it seems to continue to escalate. As I said earlier, it's essential to know your triggers, and we just have a big responsibility in managing it. You need a support network, and there have to be ground rules. I mean, if you withdraw, and they haven't seen you in a couple of days, then there needs to be agreement between you and them that they come over, and just things like that. But the book goes into it goes very deep into my private experience with it, and how I made that long journey to where I am today, and hopefully it will help someone. If you're very interested in the bipolar, I do have a blog, which is livingbipolardisorder.blogspot.com. I would also recommend an excellent book by Kay Redfield Jameson. It's called An Unquiet Mind. It is excellent. And there are a multitude of resources available to find out information. If you think you are going through something and it might be bipolar, you can go online and look at the behaviors that are associated with it. It's just, I do believe we have to, if we're suffering, like you said you were searching, we have to do what we can to, really find out what we've got, what we need to do, and just, how to move on positively in our lives.
Mm. And how did you find the process of writing, I guess, the blog and the book now? Did you find it therapeutic to go over your story and write about it, or was it quite challenging to bring up everything?
No, it was very cathartic to begin the writing. And, I cover some of it is very essay oriented about a particular experience, like, mania comes to call. And some of it is helpful information, like medications, how to talk to your doctor. I will mention this about medications, Hannah. Know what the side effects are when your doctor prescribes something. I almost died twice due to reactions of several medications. But anyway, the book is very personal. It talks about the very specific experiences I have, and I'm real pleased with the way it's going. I really, it's going to take a lot of work, but I'd really like to have it done by May, which is Mental Health Month. I think that would be a good time to release it. So we'll see.
Oh, good luck. Good luck with that. But a lot of respect for the writing process. So I think there's that idea, isn't it, that everyone has a book in them out. Everyone has that idea of, oh, I'd love to write a book. But
Absolutely.
actually doing it is a different thing, as I can imagine.
Well, I've been a prolific writer since childhood, and in my career, I wrote everything, the annual reports. I mean, but then I began to have time to do my own writing, and I love it. I love it. It's exciting, and it's, I like weaving words. And when you have a subject matter like this, my life with bipolar, my struggle with it, and my, success with it, it really means a lot to be able to put that down. And if I help one or two people with it, I will have done something good.
Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure from this podcast that you'll help people as well who are listening to this, and maybe
I hope so.
Yeah, maybe recognizing something from what you're saying in their own experience, or even just that idea of looking after themselves in the way that you would if you had like diabetes, like you said, as the example. You would take your meds.
Exactly.
You might be frustrated that you have it, and I think that's fine to be pissed off, but
yeah,
I'm frustrated about it, but you look after yourself and you take your meds, and just because it's something to do with the mind, it's still that looking after your health.
Very much so.
Yeah. So I have some questions that I ask everyone that comes on the podcast. So it'd be great to get your answers to these.
Okay.
So the first one is, what always boosts your mood, or what brings you joy?
Well, there are a lot of, like I mentioned earlier, whitewater rafting is just the most thrilling thing. I love to camp. I love to dig in the dirt. But the thing that really gives me the most joy is when I can positively give to another person, and altruistically. That really does. I try to be very positive with other people, and whenever someone is in need, having been through being in need myself, it means the world to me when I can help them and know that I've done something for them. I mean, it's a private, internal joy, but that really means a lot. One of my friends told me, "You're generous to a fault," and I said, "Well, I don't think so. I don't think so."
Well, there's a quote from, I think, the Dalai Lama that actually last week's podcast I talked about kindness that I used, and it's this idea actually it's being selfishly altruistic, because if you feel really good from doing it, it's almost you're doing it for other people, but you get that buzz from doing it as well.
Oh yeah, it is a sense of satisfaction. Yes, it is, and to produce something like when I've written something that I'm very proud of, it gives me a sense of joy. That I'm able to channel feelings into words that hopefully evoke emotions in other people.
So my next question for you is, what makes life meaningful for you?
Well, being productive, I mean, that's very important to me. My family, having a solid base family, the relationships I have with them, solid intellectual relationships with people who stimulate you, who inspire you to go, higher, learn more. Knowing now that things have changed, because at one point in my life was meaningless. So now I am able to, see the meaningful moments in my life. Being a good person. I know that sounds, trite or I don't know, but being a good person and being productive and not letting life just pass me by. Being ready to jump right in and accomplish things, do things, that kind of thing.
Hmm. And I think, actually, I don't think it sounds trite at all. And actually, it's the kind of thing that comes up so often when I ask this question to people. That idea about helping people and service and that kind of thing. It comes up so often. So my next question, and I guess we've touched on this a little bit in our conversation already. But on the podcast, obviously, we talk about mental health experiences. And as you said, 1 in 3 people will experience some kind of mental illness. But we all have our own mental world and we would all benefit from looking after ourselves mentally. So, my question is, what does mental wellness mean to you? And how do you look after your own mental well being?
Well, mental health, well-being, I guess, is being able to handle the different emotions that I experience, being able to deal with them and manage them, and to be high functioning again, which I was unable to do when I was encumbered by, the extremes of the illness. Uh, just, again, being able to handle the things that life throws with you that we all have to deal with, but to deal with them in a positive and a way that handles it appropriately. And how do my own well-being, again, I accept the responsibility I have. I have to take my meds. I have to know my triggers. I have to know if I'm slipping into, if I'm letting either the mania or the depression creep in. I have to learn I have to know how to reach out. I have to, I have to be active, get good exercise. Your diet's very important. There's a lot that goes into mental well-being that, you might not think. Like I said, and with bipolars, even light is a source of a certain amount of light helps elevate mood. And so, and writing helps. It sort of sometimes takes the poison or the sorrow out, and I can put it down on a paper and look at it, and it's no longer inside of me. So those are some of the things.
Hmm. So there are a couple of my buzzwords I talk about a lot on the podcast, and my other one is mindset. So could you describe your own mindset or your own outlook on life or approach to life, however you want to conceptualize it?
Well, I always was before the illness really exacerbated, and I'm even more so now that my life is under control. I'm very positive. I, try to look at things and assess the positive aspects of it. I don't know, that's sort of tough to say. I know, I believe in myself today. I spent years hating myself, things that stemmed from my childhood, which I mentioned early in the broadcast. But, self-talk can be very critical. And for years, I felt I hated myself. I felt like I was no good. I was worthless. And I learned along the way in this recovery part, well, not really recovery, but learning to manage, that it's okay to acknowledge your talents and abilities and to pursue them with passion. And I guess that's, I don't know, is that my mindset, Hannah?
Yeah, no, it definitely definitely comes under that. And I think that, I mean, I can definitely relate from my own experience to that idea of self-hatred and that.
Oh,
And I
God.
think
Terrible.
That is, I think that's so common as well, but that we don't also talk about that, because I guess we don't want to admit to people, do we, that we think we're, I don't know, awful or rubbish or whatever.
Worthless.
Yeah. But I think it's
No good.
something that probably a lot of us have and really struggle with the view of ourselves and the self-criticism and all of that. So it's really good to hear that you're in a better place in terms of how you feel about yourself in that way.
Oh, yeah. And it's okay.
I always ask guests if they can leave the listeners with between 1 and 3 strategies that they can put in place in their life that are going to have a massive impact. So what are your 1 to 3 tips that you would share with people, or things that you would suggest they do?
Overall, or from a bipolar standpoint? Either one. Well, I really think go back to your mindset. I mean, I think, I've heard it said, when you get up in the morning, you decide what your day's going to be like. What's your attitude? Are you positive, or, oh no, another day? Or look for the positives and live with passion. Find things that do make you passionate and pursue them. And don't give up. I mean, keep trying. You're going to get there eventually. From a standpoint of being bipolar, okay, take your meds, know your symptoms and triggers, be able to reach out and realize your own responsibility. Because in the long run, those are the things that are going to keep you alive and bring you back to happiness.
Brilliant. Thank you for those. And then the last thing, if people want to connect with you online, so I know that you gave your blog address earlier, and we'll leave a link to that in the show notes as well, so people can find it from there. Are you on any other social media if people want to connect with you?
Yes, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm not sure I should give my email address.
No, but we can link to your Twitter and your Facebook as well if you'd like.
And I absolutely, you can also communicate me through my blog, but, and I encourage anyone who would like to talk with me about this more. I am more than happy to talk with you, and no matter what phase you're in, I really would be glad to talk with you, and maybe I would have something to share that might actually help someone, and that would be something I would like to do.
Very generous of you. To a fault.
I wish I'd had somebody to talk to maybe help me understand what I was going through.
I think also there is something really powerful in one, just being able to talk and having someone listen. But I suppose especially if that person who's listening has that experience as well.
Exactly.
So even if they're not really giving you advice, or they can't solve it for you, that that they have been there.
It's reassuring and comforting, I guess. I mean, it's comforting to know you're not alone, that it's not something that has just come down from the heavens and struck you. So, but yes, I would, enjoy the opportunity to talk with other people, because I'm interested in their experience as well. And especially writing the book, I feel like that might be an important part, is to talk about other people's experiences, because it can manifest itself in different ways. I mean, your experience might be different than my experience, and so on.
Yeah, and we talked briefly about the different types, and also with the cycling. And your experience is rapid cycling, but someone might have a very different cycle to their bipolar.
Right.
But thank you so much, Sheree, for coming on and for sharing your experiences. And I've really enjoyed the discussion that we've had, and I think it'll be so useful for listeners to hear. So thank you so much.
Well, Hannah, thank you. It's been a great opportunity to talk about this with you, and I hope it does help someone out there. And I wish you the very best. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you again to Sheree for joining us and for really getting personal and sharing details of her story. And I just wanted to share some information about bipolar if listening to this has resonated with you. So there are different types. So bipolar 1 again, is the type that Sheree has and that she talked about. And a diagnosis of this means that you'll have had at least one episode of mania lasting longer than a week. 90% of people also have periods of depression. Manic episodes will generally last 3 to 6 months if left untreated. Depressive 6 to 12 months without treatment. Just to shout out, this is information from Rethink Mental Illness, who I would, they're one of the websites I'd recommend if you wanted information about mental illness generally. Rethink Mental Illness, Mind, the Mental Health Foundation, and also Time to Talk, Time to Change. It's one I've spoken about before, and that campaign. So bipolar 2 means it's common to have symptoms of depression, at least one period of major depression, and at least one period of hypomania instead of mania. And so hypomania is basically a milder form of mania. Bipolar 2 is, I guess, less extreme than bipolar 1, but some people have a mixture, so they might have bipolar 1 or 2 with mixed features, and this means that they might experience symptoms of mania or hypomania and depression at the same time. And if you've ever heard the phrase mixed bipolar state, this is what it refers to. And someone experiencing that might feel the kind of sad hopelessness that is associated with depression, as well as being very restless and overactive, so traits associated with the mania. You can also have rapid cycling bipolar 1 or 2, and this is what Sheree was describing. And this means having 4 or more depressive, manic or hypomanic episodes in a 12-month period. You can also have bipolar 1 or 2 with a seasonal pattern. So it might be that in winter people have more depressive episodes and just affected in some way by the seasons. And this links to the importance of having that mood tracker to actually recognize the pattern in your mood. And that's something that I would recommend for anyone, whether you have bipolar, a different mental illness, or generally, I think having that awareness, as Sheree and I talked about, and that responsibility for your own mood and your own mental health is a really beneficial thing to do. And the last one that Rethink Mental Illness talk about is cyclothymia. Hopefully I'm saying that right. Cyclothemic disorder means that you've experienced regular episodes of hypomania and depression for at least 2 years, but you wouldn't receive a diagnosis of bipolar because the symptoms are milder but can last longer. And this is something that could develop into bipolar disorder. So again, that tracking of moods could be really important to see, and if you had cyclothymia, it could develop further into bipolar. So keeping that kind of track and that awareness of your symptoms. So I'm going to talk just briefly about the symptoms because we're talking about mania and depression, and you might be listening and thinking, what does that mean? So symptoms of mania can include feeling happy or excited, even if things aren't going well, full of new exciting ideas, moving quickly from one idea to another. It could be hearing voices that people can't normally hear, being more irritable, talking very quickly, jumping around ideas, racing thoughts, easily distracted, not able to sleep or feeling you don't want to sleep, thinking more than you can do more than you actually can, making unusual big decisions without thinking them through, or doing things that you normally wouldn't that could cause problems. So these could be kind of risk-taking behaviours like spending lots of money, having casual sex, using drugs or alcohol, gambling, making unwise business decisions, all that kind of stuff. Hypomania is a milder form of that. And then depression will include things like low mood, less energy, feeling tired, feeling hopeless, guilty, worthless, less interested in things that you normally enjoy. You might have difficulty concentrating, making decisions, feeling restless and irritable, sleeping too much or not being able to sleep, changes in appetite, more or less hungry, losing or gaining weight, and you might have thoughts of death or suicide attempts, and that's something that Sheree has discussed from her own experience. And then lastly, psychosis is something that can happen during severe episodes of mania or depression. And psychosis would, the symptoms are hallucinations, and hallucinations can be visual, so seeing things that aren't there, auditory, so hearing things that aren't there. They could be tactile, so feeling things that aren't there, so basically experiencing things through your senses that aren't actually there. And then also delusions, so believing things that are not true, and other people usually find these beliefs to be unusual. So, for example, someone in a manic episode might believe they have special powers, they're being monitored by the government, that kind of stuff. And a depressive episode might be feeling guilty about something that you think you've done, but that you haven't. So that's the kind of types and the symptoms. And then in terms of getting help, we've talked about initially contacting your GP. And then in terms of treatment, this is something that would be discussed with a health practitioner, but it would be some kind of mood stabilizer to manage those symptoms. So that could be lithium, it could be certain types of antipsychotics or benzodiazepines, but that is something that, as Sheree said, it was a long process for her, and it's not necessarily that straightforward to find a medication that works for you, because we all have our own internal chemistry, our own internal brain chemistry. So something that works for one person doesn't necessarily work in the same way for another. It's a lot of information, but hopefully that's also useful. One of the things on the podcast is, our whole mission is about informing, inspiring, and empowering people. So hopefully we've given you a lot of information today, hopefully inspired through Sheree's personal story of going through a challenging time, learning to understand what is going on with her mental health, but getting to this place now where she's in a good place. She has that stability in her life, and can lead a well and fulfilled life. So hopefully that offers some inspiration to people who are listening, and hopefully we've given you some practical strategies that everyone can put in place in their life that will be beneficial. So I hope that has been useful. I'm going to read a brief extract now from the book An Unquiet Mind. So Sheree mentioned the book An Unquiet Mind, a memoir of moods and madness by K. Redfield Jameson, and it's an amazing book. I've read it. I would absolutely recommend it. And I want to just read an extract from it, which I think really kind of sums up very poetically, I think, the highs and lows of bipolar, and also that impact of getting to know yourself and being more familiar with your own mental fluctuations, I guess. So Kay writes, "Therefore I now move more easily with the fluctuating tides of energy, ideas and enthusiasms that I remain so subject to. My mind still, now and again, becomes a carnival of lights, laughter, and sounds and possibilities. The laughter and exuberance and ease will, filling me, spill out and over and into others. These glinting, glorious moments will last for a while, a short season, and then move on. My high moods and hopes, having ridden briefly in the top car of the Ferris wheel, will, as suddenly as they came, plummet into a black and grey and tired heap. Time will pass, these moods will pass, and I will eventually be myself again. But then, at some unknown time, the electrifying carnival will come back into my mind. These comings and goings, this grace and godlessness have become such a part of my life that the wild colours and sounds now have become less strange and less strong, and the blacks and greys that inevitably follow are likewise less dark and frightening. Beneath those stars, Melville once said, is the universe of gliding monsters. With time, one has encountered many of the monsters, and one is increasingly less terrified of those still to be met." So, yeah, we've got that high and low, and then this idea that there are these monsters. We all have these monsters, but over time, we have encountered many monsters, and we're then less afraid of the new ones to meet because we've got that familiarity. We know them, we know that we can handle them, that we can deal with them. So that realizing or getting to know your own fluctuations, your own mental state, if you like, whether it's a well state or a less well, a state where you're experiencing some kind of mental illness, getting to know it so that it's more familiar, and through that, knowing your own triggers, like Sheree said, it becomes more manageable, and taking responsibility for that. So we'll definitely put the name of the book in the show notes, but I would absolutely recommend An Unquiet Mind to read. If you want to find out more about bipolar and someone's experience, or just generally, I'd recommend it because it is an amazing book and really powerful. I think it's just so interesting. I personally find it so interesting to kind of see into other people's minds. So yeah, I'd absolutely recommend it. So that is everything now for this episode. Again, we would love for you to tweet #World Bipolar Day, #Bipolar Strong to share this episode. And we hope you tune back in on Wednesday, where we're joined by Danny, who has a podcast where he talks to people about their screwed up moments. So difficult periods in their life and how they've got through them. And we talk about psychosis and medication again in this episode from one of the episodes that he relates. So we hope you join us for that. And as always, you can join us on Facebook in our Facebook group, the Psykhe Mental Wellbeing Community, or you can say hi to us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter at Psykhe Coaching, and that's Psykhe, Psykhe, coaching, all one word. Hope you have a great week and, well, a great couple of days because we'll be back on Wednesday. Take care. Bye.